Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Renaissance Room podcast. I am always so sincerely grieved whenever I am in the mood to create content, and the only thing that my phone allows is TikTok because of the storage, right? I can delete apps. I don't even have that many photos. Quite frankly, I don't even take photos anymore. I think something about the convenience of the iPhone has really disheveled my love for photography and the art of photography, right? I feel like there was really something beautiful in being able to capture an image that does indeed speak 1,000 words. And I just think that, I don't know, I just feel like maybe because when I talk about the convenience, it's more so like you have this iPhone with you every day, and it's I don't know, I just think there's a lost art in photography today, right? Especially when you have editing softwares that don't really require much either. So that's just a thought in regards to photography. But in today's episode, I want to talk about emotional resiliency and as it relates to emotional resilience and as it relates to our relationships. And so something that I would love to kind of engage in this conversation is, do you guys feel as though, right? Is there a way to have a negative attitude, right? Your disposition towards the opposite sex is inherently negative. And this could be due to previous relational experiences. I mean, typically that's how we're wired, right? I mean, if you are someone who's heterosexual, you're not born that way, right? You don't, something typically happens that make you have a bit of an aversion to the opposite sex. And so I was considering how, right now we're in this space where cheating is prevalent, right? Adulterers are running wild. Okay, that's in the book of Timothy. It's prophetic. And the hearts of many are growing cold towards one another, right? People, love is not out here, right? It really isn't. Love is not in the world. God is love, but love is definitely not in this world. People are very unkind. And so you have that, right? You have that. We can see that it doesn't take a scientist to kind of, you can say you don't like religion, but you can look at it even in terms of science, right? What is happening on a sociological level and how we interact with one another. Like, it's very evident that we no longer have the same compassion that we once did towards one another. And so I was thinking about how if you inherently have this negative attitude towards the opposite sex, I don't think you can actually turn it off as it pertains to your familial and platonic relationships, right? And so, for example, if you have a negative attitude towards men, then it would only be natural that you would have a negative attitude towards, your siblings, if you have male siblings, and as well as your male friends, right? It's going to be really hard to bridge the gap if you don't have a healthy mindset. And so I just was thinking about all the ways in which we should be a little bit more mindful in how we engage in the things that we take on, because you can't turn that on and off, right? With a particular person, like, it just doesn't work that way. And so I think in order for us to stay level-headed as we, we're in these online spaces, and a lot of people are coming from a place of emotional exhaustion, right? And failing to, develop emotional resilience, which we're going to talk about. I think if you want to be someone who's healthy and you want to remain level-headed, I do think you are going to have to lean a little bit more into those platonic and familial relationships. And I think that even when you start talking about family and the breakdown of family and how, a lot of people are like, cut off your family and, screw your friends and, cut off all these people, cut off your dad, cut off your mom, that's kind of where that attitude is coming from, right? It's like, you can't turn it off. You can't just say, hey, I'm done with dating. These dating partners suck. This is hard, or whatever the case may be. And then think you're going to have healthy relationships with the opposite sex in any other form or any other dynamic. It just doesn't work that way. And so, like I said, if you want to be healthy, I think you should look into that. So what I was thinking about, especially as it pertains to the Black community, I understand that the hope deferred makes the heart sick. Okay, right? I get it. That's Bible. Okay, on God, quite literally. But it's something that I'm really concerned about today, because I wonder, what is it about maybe not even just the prevalence of it in the Black community, but what is it about us as Americans that make it so hard for us to develop emotional resilience, especially as it pertains to relational disappointment? I think that I'm going to say, we're just talking here. We're just talking, I'm just trying to brainstorm and try to find the answers, because I really do wonder, what is it about us that, you have relational disappointment and then you ultimately just decide the solution to have just writing off everybody, right? Because that's exactly what happens. And it's unfortunate, because I think even just given the replacement of science and robots and all these different things, right? We have had to forego our biology as humans. We've had to forego what it is to connect as humans, what it is that make us Homo sapiens, what it is that makes us unique in the animal kingdom, And so it's interesting. We're the only species that's doing that, but those needs are still innate. They're still there. It is what it is. You'll heal, you'll bounce back from it, and you will eventually desire connection. So I questioned, is it a lack of tools and resources, right, in regards to developing emotional resiliency, or is it really the lack of conversation that we have around emotional resiliency? For example, when I think about, isn't it even emotional resiliency or emotional resilience? I think I'm saying that wrong. Emotional resilience, Jesus Christ. So when I think about emotional resilience, I think, one, when you have the commodification of love, okay, you have the prevalence of love, you have the media, and you can't cut on a movie without the perfect guy, the perfect X, Y, and Z. I think that these images have a way of keeping us in a state of fixation on perfection. And we kind of see these glimpses of what could have been and what might have been, but something that we were never really able to nurture and sustain for a long period of time, which, when I think about long-term relationships, we're at this place right now. I talk about adultery, I talk about people cheating and it being at an all-time high. I mean, I know algorithmically the things that you like will continue to show up on your feed, but it's very evident to me that it's not just the world, right, so to speak. We talk about secularism, but it's even in the church, right? You have a lot of people today, and the messages, they gonna wish that they didn't do you like they did you, and they didn't get away with what you did or what they did, right? You have these messages about karma, and what it really says to me is that you have a lot of people who have been hurt, right? You have a lot of people that have been hurt. I mean, women have been able to form communities and friendships and build YouTube channels, men and women, based off of the hurt. So it is something that is very real. And I don't think that we handle it with the level of care that we should, right? Emotional wounds are very real. Psychological wounds, you go to the mental health department, right? You go to psychiatry ward. Physical wounds, you go to the hospital, but emotional wounds, we don't really know what to do with that, right? And so you have a lot of people who are really struggling to find a path through those difficult feelings, through that relational disappointment, which is biological, right? And so there's really no practice that is cathartic like social media. However, obviously the problem in this is that when you build a community based on this negativity, it's really hard to escape it. And when you start to kind of heal and come into a place of healthy attachment or whatever the case may be, it's going to be really hard for you to bond with people because you're always going to have this negativity looming over you. And so that then changes your dynamic and how you interact with your online communities, which is where, for a lot of us, that was the haven. That was a safe space. And that's where we have our community. So it's very interesting when you look at kind of like the cost of this. But yeah, I think that those are some of the things. And I also think too, we live in a world where we're told that if we just work on ourselves, if we just be enough, if we just do X, Y, and Z, then we can have the desired outcomes that we want. But the truth is that we, quite frankly, never actually get those things because, people have the right to leave and people do leave and people change. And, when you start talking about forming a long-term relationship, I think it takes someone who is very conscious and very self-aware in order to have a long-term relationship with someone. I do, because for one, I just think you have to be someone who is disciplined enough, and know that about yourself, not just to avoid, cheating or committing adultery in your marriage, but you have to be disciplined enough to be able to endure monotony. Okay. You have to be disciplined enough to be able to, stick with something and explore the intricacies of something. It's kind of like your career, for example. You start something, you're like, I absolutely hate this. But the more you learn about it, the more interesting it becomes. And then the more windows of opportunities begin to open up for you, right? So it's just like, I think you have to be someone who's disciplined enough to really be consistent. And that's something that we just don't have today. And I don't think that it's all based on you did this or they did that, right? I think it's really based on like capitalism and how we are socialized in American society. So for example, I was thinking about this, right? I was writing an article about it, a column rather. And I was thinking about all the ways in which we do fashion, right? We want convenience. We want what's hot. We get rid of what's not. But what happens when we get rid of what's not hot, or fashionable or in season, is that the style typically comes back around. And then what happens is we begin to miss that style, right? We look at old photos when we were wearing a certain type of look and we were like, wow, that looked so good in that blouse or whatever the case may be. And it's like you start to miss that item that you got rid of for the more popular item, and so I think it's more so like you never really lose the sense of connection that you have with the person. So I don't think that the feelings of love is what's missing from our I don't think the feeling of love and connection is void, and I don't think that that's not why we're struggling to connect, right? Like, it's a feeling, it comes and goes. Sometimes you feel like you're on fire for God, right? You know what I mean? You like, hey, listen, I love the Lord. Okay, I'm going into ministry. And then some days you're like, you know what, I'm good. I'm off. But it's like the love and the connection that you have with anything that you've sustained over a period of time, it's like it never goes away. So, but I think when you take capitalism, it says, hey, if it's broken, you have to fix it. If it's making your life hard, you have to replace it. If it's an inconvenience, you need to go find something that's a little bit more convenient. And so I just think when you swap out, or when you take this type of paradigm of consumerism and you put that in the place of your relationships with other humans who are a lot more intricate and, complex, then you're going to suffer. You're going to suffer. But yeah, you guys. So I think that that's really something to think about. I think we really do have to kind of sit and consider, like, why are we struggling with emotional resiliency? Like, we understand that we can have disappointment in life and we can be okay. We understand from our past experiences that, hey, we thought that it would never get better. We would never meet another person, but we did, we did. And we continue to do so, and so it's not that the pain is intolerable or unbearable. Unbearable. I don't want to minimize heartbreak in itself, because it is very much emotionally draining. It's exhausting. It's a bit psychologically damaging. But I do think we have to be a little bit more mindful of where we park it, if you know what I'm saying. I think we have to be more mindful of like, where are we going to land, when all this is said and done. And I think we have to be conscious enough to be like, hey, listen, I'm going through this, I'm processing these emotions. I know right now I'm on this negative tip, but I don't really feel that way. And we have to catch ourselves, because I think if you don't have that level of consciousness, then it's going to bleed into everything else that you do. And you're going to become a perpetuator of the same harm that was inflicted upon you. Right. And so that's where you have the famous people. I said famous people, the infamous hurt people, so we're struggling with emotional resilience. And I don't think that there's a space in society where we can really go to process it in a healthy way. And, I believe that this is the biggest hiccup and this is the biggest breakdown in relationships, and that's like just generally, generally. People are going to disappoint you. Why do I think it's more common now? Well, I think that it would be lazy for me to say, well, hurt people. I think that's a very lazy way of thinking in terms of this phenomenon, what we have right here. I want to say it's just generally a little bit more easier to do. It's easy to kind of just be like a trash person, you know? And this is also too, when I think about Christianity and the critiques of Christianity and so forth, it's like, you wouldn't want to follow Christ because it requires a level of discipline. You know what I mean? It's like, you have to be like a good person. You have to do what's right, you know, and it's something that you do consistently, you know, and it requires something of you, right? And I think for a lot of people, you don't really want that. You don't want that discipline in your life, you know? You don't want to be held to a certain type of standard. You know, you want to just kind of be able to do what you want to do. And I just think about how for a lot of people, when you start talking about, you know, people being hurt and really what it boils down to is like intense suffering and misery. And the reason being is because you're living beneath what you could actually be. And you never really reach your full potential because you don't know how to do hard things, right? And so if you don't know how to do hard things, then you'll never actually become all that you could be. And that's a very miserable existence, right? Like you'll never reach your potential. And that's genuine, like, you know what I mean? And so I think just to be born with a gift, to be born knowing that you are here for a specific purpose and you have something that you are, you know, supposed to be carrying out while you're here on this earth, and being met with this, you know, existential crisis that you will never actually live up to that thing. That's a very miserable existence because at this point you're not really living, right? You're just waiting to die because you know you'll never be able to spread your wings. And so I think that that's really what it is, like on a spiritual level, on a deeper level, like psychologically, I think you're just kind of like a walk-in, like a ticking time bomb, you know, you're just like waiting to self-destruct. And you do every time you enter into relationships with other people, especially people who are a little bit more authentic and who know who they are and they have a purpose and they find things in life that bring them joy despite all of the hardships in their lives, right? Because nobody gets out of this thing unscathed. Okay. Despite whatever it is that they're going through, despite their shortcomings, they find joy, they find ways to give back. They find purpose. They can sleep at night and they're living a life that's a little bit more upward, you know, in some ways. That's going to bother you. You know, that's going to bother you. And what we do when we have certain intrinsic values that we admire in other people, because, you know, it's very clear we can't take it. You know, like it's one thing. It's like, okay, this person has a Mercedes. I can figure out a way to get this Mercedes, right? But it's like when someone has character, you can't really take that, you know? And so what happens, I think we become, I don't know, it's like a spiritual battle. You know, it's a spiritual battle at that point. And you seek to destroy that person because that's the only way that you can really exist, because you can't take that. You know what I mean? You can't take their spirits. You can't take their joy. You know what I mean? You can't take, you know, their mindset, their heart posture. You know what I mean? You can't take that, you know? And so the only thing to do in that case, when it comes to like intrinsic value and intangibles, is to destroy it, you know? And so it kind of becomes like a survival of the fittest type of thing. And so I think that's what we have today. And I think for a lot of people, the journey to really fulfilling your purpose and becoming someone who is like, you know, fulfilled, I guess you could say, it requires some level of self-investment on your part. And I don't think that people are focused enough. Just generally, I think we have way too many distractions in society, especially today, to be able to really invest in that. And I don't think people really know where to go, right? There's so many motivational speakers today. Nowadays, you can't even watch a video without 30,000 ads and people trying to sell your product. And, you know, somewhere in there, they're injecting themselves and they're injecting superficialities to, you know, how to go about acquiring this thing. So you just have a lot of like false teachings, and you have a lot of people who are misguided. When I first started trying to figure out what my purpose was and what I wanted to do with my life and everything, I had a pastor, an online church, and I had a few motivational speakers, but they were prominent figures, right? Very respectable figures like Miles Monroe. And there weren't many, there weren't many. But now, fast forward and it's like there's so many people who are in this space. And, it's always funny too when people talk about oversaturation. Well, I think when you start to have like oversaturation, things get clouded. You know what I mean? And it's like you have people doing things just because they can. I felt like after, I don't even know, I want to say Eric Thomas, the hip hop preacher, after that era, then it just kind of went downhill, right? It became such an easy thing to do. People were online making money. People were creating courses, online communities, whatever the case may be, to generate an income. And that had became something that anybody could do. It's like, hey, listen, anybody can start a video and, and motivate people. And so the purpose and the intent of it all just kind of got diluted. People were no longer using their voices to encourage and enrich the lives of others, but to really make their pockets fat. You know what I mean? So, yeah. And so I don't think there's even a way for people to find that today. It's like almost like the windows of heaven are closing. You know what I mean? Like, how do people go about finding that? The church, I would say, did have some type of leverage with its servitude, but today the churches are so greedy. I talked about this on TikTok, why a lot of churches are broke, right? A lot of churches are not rooted in God. They don't edify the body, right? You can't even go there to get some spiritual bread, right? They're stuck on the milk, the pastors aren't even reading the word, and so where do you go? What do you go? What do you do? If you are someone who's just kind of in that beginning, of course you can always go to God and that would be your journey. But it's nice to be able to have the tools and the resources to kind of aid you along the way, And so I think what happens is we kind of settle for fast food. We settle for something that's a little bit more convenient, which is destroying others, using others, and, finding other people, using others, surrounding ourselves with other people who we feel like can meet these needs, right? We think it's one of those things to where it's like, well, if this person is spiritually mature, I'll be spiritually mature if I hang around them. And though there is some truth to that, people can encourage you. At the end of the day, you guys, there's nothing you can do to get out of the work. You cannot cheat the work. Like, there are no shortcuts. I don't care what you say. That's why I critique manifest culture and affirmation culture so heavily, because it's like, I don't care what anybody says. You can think positive all you want. You will never have that X, Y, and Z in which you desire if you do not put the work in. And when I said that, on TikTok, I was like, getting older is realizing that there's going to be certain things you're never going to possess. There are going to be certain places you're never going to go, and someone was like, you got to be positive. That's not a positive way to think. And I'm like, well, no, it's the truth. Do you really think you're going to be like in a jet? Do you really think you're going to have a jet? And it's not to say it can't happen for you, right? I don't even want to name something like a jet, because to me, honestly, saying that doesn't even sound like too far-fetched, but I'm trying to think of something that's like outlandish, right? Like before it was a Lamborghini, but it's so crazy even as I'm trying to think of something that is a bit outlandish, because now, right, the aspiration is no longer 70,000. It's no longer $1 million, right? It's $1 billion, right? Like kids are like, I want to be a billionaire. And it's like, whoa. You know what I mean? Whoa, that's big, And so it's like, but that's the reality. But why is that? Why does that mean that you're going to have a bad life? Why does that make for such a bad life if you realize that you'll never be able to afford a $5,000 a day vacation? You know what I mean? Like, why is that why would that make me negative? Why would that make me someone who thinks small? Why would that make me someone who needs to practice positive affirmation? When that's the truth. That's the truth, I think about how many businesses are started and they don't reach that level of income, and it's not because it's not a good business, but because, well, one, things take time. I mean, I think about some of the conglomerate businesses or some of the multi-million-dollar businesses and how they started like in 1940, bro. You know what I mean? And it's been the consistency and the endurance of building a brand over time. Right? Over time. And so I just think that we have so many unrealistic expectations. And we don't have enough practicality to go about how to handle our day-to-day lives. Boom. And that's the conclusion that I'm coming up on, right? Like when we talk about emotional resilience, we're failing at emotional resilience because we don't have the practicality to endure hardships, disappointments, and our day-to-day lives, right? We don't have what it takes to suffer through reality. Yeah. We don't have what it takes to find joy in the monotony of work and steady employment. We don't have the practicality to endure being in a relationship that maybe isn't Instagram worthy, right? That doesn't meet all of these superficialities for the sake of being partnered when we're well into age and we need someone to come to the chemo treatments. God forbid we don't get chemo, but I'm just saying, you know what I mean? I'm just saying, right? I'm just saying, okay? We don't have what it takes to make short-term sacrifices for long-term gains, right? That's a game. That's a playbook that is outdated. We don't want to hear that. You know what I mean? We want it now. We want it fast. We want it in 3 days, period. Right? Period. You know, you think about why relationships lasted in the past. Well, it's because one of those things where I had to see you every day, right? I got to work with you every day, right? If it was a coworker, if it was someone you were in school with, right? I had to put the work in and get to know you through and through so we could actually build something that is real and I don't have to question it, right? I think that's another reason too. Like when you rush things and you take this same convenience from like capitalism, commodification, and you take that paradigm and you look at your partner like a product, then yeah, you're never going to find relational fulfillment. How can you? And then the thing is too, right? That paradigm and how it destroys relationships before they even get started. I don't even want to use destroy. I think destruction is a bit too serious, but I will say that it rules out, it cancels out, right? Because it's like, for example, here you are, you're dating this person, you see something you don't like, and instantly you're out of there. You cannot tolerate imperfection. You just can't do it. You can't do it. I mean, you don't even know why you can't do it. Why this one, because like if we were to ask you on a reasonable standpoint, like from a reasonable standpoint, like, okay, this person made this mistake. Do you really not want to go? You never want to see this person again? Is that really reasonable? You would stop and you might actually ponder because you realize how ridiculous that really is. But I think when you've been fed pseudo love, perfection and all these different, it's going to be really hard for you to deal with a human being essentially because there's just way too many imperfections. There's way too many faults, and it's so far from any idealized image that you may have, right? It's like you have a fantasy. And this is why I'm also opposed to like online dating. People have an idea of you and slowly but surely, and I think this is honestly why a lot of people are suffering as well, and they're struggling with that emotional resilience because you're meeting so many people and you're like, why did this person do that? Why did this guy blow me off? Why did this girl not call me back? Well, because when you're online, people take a summation of what you post, what you do, you know what I mean? And they say, this is who you are. And that's just what it is, right? If we take a picture, we say who's sad in the picture and who's happy in the picture. That's just what it is. That's all I have. You know what I mean? I don't know these people. I wasn't there in the moment, right? And so that kind of ties into what I was saying initially about photography and the lost art of it and how it really is an art. And there's really something said about pictures and what they communicate. And so anyway, and so what happens is you don't live up to these standards and these expectations. So because all we know is whether something is all we know is whether something is effective or defective. I now put you in the box where I say damaged goods, return it back. I'm ordering a return label. You know what I mean? Because it's like, I can't see you outside of that. I can't possibly fathom the array of faults and flaws and shortcomings that you possess because I just can't see past, I can't see that far, right? I can't see that far. And that's how we've kind of been conditioned in society. And that's kind of how, capitalism, like it all ties into our relationships. Like it's a paradigm that is persisting in the minds of a lot of Americans today, right? And so there you have it. Right? Like I cannot tolerate, like we have become so intolerable, right? It's like you see a fault and it's like I cannot tolerate this. I can't tolerate, you can't, because reality is so humbling. Reality is humbling. And it has a very interesting way of obliterating everything that you've ever sat and thought you knew, right? Because when you're single, all you do is really sit and fantasize about your idealized person. And I mean, if you go to a therapist, you go to any blog, any self-help in the modern day, it's going to say, well, what do you want in a partner? Right? And then you have time to sit and idealize and conceptualize and to create this fantasy of a person. And if you're online, you then start to project those feelings onto this person. You message them, you guys get a date. You're so sold on this fantasy, you're not going to see it coming. And we talk about things like red flags and etc. Yeah, that's kind of where this shows up. But it also just kind of shows up in the reality that like no human is ever going to be your fantasy. That's impossible. You see, but it's so hard to kind of debunk, and it's so hard to refrain from pedestalizing other people. It's hard. You know what I mean? That's what I said. This is what I said at the beginning, right? Like it really takes severe consciousness to really be in a relationship with someone because we are so programmed. And when I say we, trust me, I'm in the same boat. I mean, it takes work. You know what I mean? It takes intentionality to be like, hey, listen, I can come on here, create this podcast. I can read my books. I can do my thing. I can have my fun. I can educate, et cetera, et cetera. But this is my reality. I'm holding on to this because this is what's real. You know what I mean? I'm holding on to this because this is what's real. This is the work. You know what I mean? This is what's going to really yield that desired result that's in my mind. And maybe it's not going to be like that, right? Maybe it'll be better than that. You know what I mean? Because it's the real thing. You see what I'm saying? I spoke about this on TikTok and how in Sue Browder's Subverted, she talked, she was a journalist. She worked for Cosmopolitan magazine, and her and, a bunch of other writers and the chief editing officer pretty much constructed the idea of the sexy, hyper independent, very rich single woman. It was a caricature that was never existed, right? It never existed. There was no single woman who was like really living this very bossy, flossy, sexually liberated life. That did not exist, right? But they created it, and then it kind of just grew widespread, and women started to kind of obtain it. But listen, this is how you always know if you're chasing after a fantasy or if you're living in reality. When you go after the fantasy, you never feel enough. Right? You never feel enough. You'll always feel like something is off. You'll always inherently feel like something is off. I cannot live up to these standards. And what you'll do is you'll continue to buy into the consumption, right? And so what do we have today? A lot of women are buying into the aesthetic of beauty, which has always been there, but we know that it is definitely transgressed. Now we have Sephora, which I personally think is racist. Steffi's gives me like racist vibes. Like I've never really been in Steffi's and had a good shopping experience, but that's just me. But you have a lot of women who are buying. So you see what I'm saying? And it's beauty like 2.0. I mean, beauty has progressed. Let's not act like, back in the day, I was like, okay, maybe we'll use a little bit of concealer to lighten something, right? But today, not only do you have physicalities, right? Like women are like, even black women, right? This was not a thing. Being thin was not in for the black girls, okay? But you have this obsession with like, if I can just obtain a certain type of aesthetic, then I can be a part of the club. You know what I mean? Then I can fit into this very sexy, idealized superwoman, right? But it's crazy because she never existed. The single woman that was like rich and well-traveled and well-versed and she was just doing the damn thing, she never existed. Can you believe that? I read that and I was so taken back. Like, you got to read it for yourself. No, seriously, go read the book. She never existed. It was something that they came up with to sell to young women. It was an idea. It was literally an idea. And this is propaganda. And here we are, 2024. We don't even know what's real, what's not real. You know what I mean? This is why I love books. This is why I love grounding and like figuring out the answers to stuff. But isn't that crazy? Just think about how many other lies we believe, right? Think about like, it's the same thing that goes true for The Bachelor, I think, right? Although I haven't read any books about like the lifestyles of bachelors that have really critiqued the outcome, right? The byproduct of living a life like a bachelor. But we see it in modern day. I have a lot of uncles and I know men who never married, who never had, that is a very miserable life. And not because you're a man and that's what you're supposed to do, or you're a woman and that's what you're supposed to do, but because here's the reality. You're a human. You're a Homo sapien. You are wired for connection. We get old, right? We get old. We actually reach a point where we no longer consume. You get to a certain age where you're like, you know what? I'm going to wear the same sweater. I'm going to wear the same jogging pants. I don't need 20 pairs of shoes, right? Like you actually get to a certain point where you no longer consume. And so when you're no longer consuming things, you get a little bit wiser. Not only are you wiser, you're more conscious, you're a little bit more slowed down. And now you look up and you're like, oh crap. I did not put in that work to really create a life that's actually fulfilling, to build partnership that will be there for me to go to these chemo treatments or whatever medical problem arise, because that's the reality, right? As much as we're trying to prevent it through our obsession with beauty and health and fitness and all these different things, when you get older, the body breaks down because it's getting ready to decompose, right? It's ready for death. And so, but when you're young, that's America's venom. It's youth, right? And it's sold to everybody. So this was good. This was a good podcast. I was really on fire with this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know it sounds like, dang, we're ending so abruptly, but I'm all out of thoughts. I think I got my point across. But yeah, I'm just going to end by saying this again. You guys, so many of the ideas that we pursue, they made it up. Right. I think about the manosphere. You had Kevin Samuels, you had all these, they made it all up. It was never real. It was never real. And so what do you have? You have a bunch of men out here who probably have great women in their lives, but guess what? We are sold on perfection. We are so consumed by the ideas of perfection and fantasy and by other people's hurt and pain and trauma, right? Given their platforms, that we can no longer engage in reality. We are quite literally intolerant to reality. Why? Because it humbles us. It humbles you to say, this is a woman who has children and I love her and I want to be with her and I want to be there for these kids. And that humbles you. That humbles you because online, they're going to tell you, this is what a man is. This is what a man should be. Right. This is the kind of lifestyle a man of your caliber, of your tax bracket, right, of your salary, whatever the case may be, your look, your aesthetic, right? This is what you deserve. And so to be in love with this woman who has children, and this is a great example because, this is a great example, right? That's intolerance. You can't tolerate that. You can't tolerate that reality because that you think that says something about you, right? And so, yeah, that's just a prime example. But yeah, there you have it. And so what do you have today? You have a lot of people who are working themselves and they don't even realize that you are now the product, right? You are the thing that is to be perfected instead of the thing that is actually living, enjoying the innovations of others, enjoying the products, you know what I mean? Allowing these things to enhance your life, right? Like having a podcast, for example, enjoying your hobbies, using technological advancements to help people in some way, you know what I mean? Something purposeful. I mean, even if it's not purposeful, even you're like, hey, listen, hey, this is a good example too. I see people who get online and they color. You know what I mean? That's great. That's cool. I like watching that type of stuff. It's very therapeutic, but instead, if you're not conscious, you become the product that needs to be tweaked. You become the thing that is on a continuum of improvement because you think that if you can just fit into these ideas, then you'll be able to have this perfect life. You'll think you'll be able to have this perfect reality, but, the ugliness, right, of reality will always be looking back at you. And until you really mature and you're conscious enough to be able to face that, you'll always struggle, to really find a deep sense of fulfillment within yourself. Until you garner real skills and practical ways of thinking, being, and doing, You will always struggle in life because regardless of what people say, social media is just, it's one facet. And I know it's so integrated in our lives. We can't possibly fathom that it's a very small facet of our lives. And it's almost like it doesn't even really exist because it could be gone tomorrow, you know? And so I hope you guys got something from this. I hope the AC turning on and off on my auto setting here wasn't too bad. I'm sorry, AC, the heat wasn't too bad. I'm so sad, you guys. I wasn't able to record this in a video, but I really hope that the audio wasn't too bad on this, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. Peace.